the question is, how is Emmy and polio intertwined? And it's very, very interesting, because up to Salk and Sabin's introduction of a wonderful, wonderful polio immunization series, every time there was a major epidemic of polio from 1895, and particularly from the 1905 Stockholm epidemic, those epidemics that are well written up, and most of them were, certainly the larger epidemics, you had different illnesses falling with the same epidemic. And Emmy always occurred at the same time as the polio epidemics. Unfortunately, and fortunately, once they were able to cure, or not cure because they never were able to cure polio once you had it, once they were able to stop polio in its tracks with the Salk and Sabin immunization, from then on, of course, there were no polio epidemics, but there were ME epidemics, and there were many of them. They actually started in 1932, but they have continued on to the present time. What has happened to ME after? Well, what happened to ME after the polio epidemics were stopped? It actually really started in 1932, when close to 100,000 people between San Francisco and the Mexican border fell ill, mainly with ME, but about 5% of them fell ill with polio. And this was centered in the Los Angeles County General Hospital, where the doctors were, as I mentioned earlier, immunized with the serum of recovered ME patients, and they actually gave these doctors ME. Now, from then on, there's been several epidemics. For instance, the next major epidemic that occurred was in Akureyri, and I went and examined 30 of these patients. That was in 1946, 47, and 48. It grumbled on for 3 years. And it was very interesting, because only about 5% of those patients actually had polio. But something very curious happened. 3 children, they were all under 12 years old, I think they were from 8 to 12 years old, fell ill with ME, and they developed Parkinson's disease. Now, kids don't develop Parkinson's disease. And those 3 kids all died of Parkinson's within 2 years of getting ME. The next wonderful thing that happened in that epidemic, and I say wonderful from a scientific point of view because it was horrible, because all of those patients were laughed at. And when I examined them, which was in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and I examined 30 of those patients, they were still pretending that they weren't ME patients because everybody said it was hysteria. A lot of them still had difficulty walking, difficulty thinking, major problems. In fact, the mayor of the capital of Iceland was one of those patients. He still had stigmata from this disease. Well, when you actually think that these people were criticized for being hysterical, it's quite tragic, and they were quite ill. But then something wonderful happened in terms of knowledge of ME. 3 years after the end of that epidemic, there was a huge polio epidemic in Iceland. And everywhere people fell ill, died, or were paralyzed with polio. But every part of the area around Akureyri in the north of Iceland, which had been infected by the same group of viruses, enteroviruses, none of them developed polio. So whatever it was, the people who developed ME were now immune from polio. So the virus that caused ME in Akureyri was close enough to polio that it actually protected these people. The next question is to tell you a little bit about the recent Ame epidemics. And it's very, very interesting. It happened simultaneously across North America. It started, and it's best known, in Lake Tahoe, where a team of girls, a girls' basketball team traveling in a bus came down with this disease. It then spread to their teachers, spread to the people of Lake Tahoe. At the same time, in North Carolina, the North Carolina Symphony Orchestra, which was a traveling orchestra which bussed around to different areas of North Carolina, they too fell ill at the same time with the same ME disease. The same thing happened in Toronto, in Montreal, and Ottawa. We didn't know about these other epidemics until 2 or 3 years later, but all of them started at the same time in August, end of July, August, September, started decreasing in October. And this is very typical of enterovirus. Enteroviruses occur, polioviruses, all of them, a peak in July, August, September, October in the countries north of the equator. It's the other way around, south of the equator. And so here you have a two-phase disease, just like polio, happening in all of these countries. I mentioned earlier that because of the criticism of NIH, they stopped investigating the epidemic in Lake Tahoe. But Ontario, the government did, and we were able to show that not only was this epidemic caused by enterovirus, but we were also able to show there was almost no Epstein-Barr virus at that time. But over the period of the next several months that this epidemic raged, that the actual enterovirus changed. And it went through 2 or 3 different types of enterovirus. Was it because it changed, or the enterovirus continually mutated into subtypes which are identified as different groups of enteroviruses? We don't know. Another fascinating thing with this epidemic, it occurred all over North America at the same time. In those cases we knew the incubation was the same, and it was identified in Canada and in Scotland as the same group of viruses. And that epidemic moved the next year to Scotland and England, and again they recovered enteroviruses in Scotland and England. So we know for sure that it was an enteroviral infection.